Welcome, everybody. Hello. Thanks for being here. This is Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center podcast, little spiritual check-in from us. So glad that you are here and tuning in wherever you are. We have people in our live Zoom room from Florida, from Oregon, from Utah, from Texas, from all over the place. And wherever you are, you're part of our spiritual family. I hope you know that. I hope you know that. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, let me see, what is it? Mamai Vangso Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. What is that verse in Bhagavad Gita? Let me just look it up here because I have the power of the world at my fingertips. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Mamai Vangso Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, Mana Sang Shtasht Indriyani Prakriti Stani Karshati. The living entities, excuse me, living entities in this conditional world are my eternal fragmental parts. Mamai Vangso Jiva Loke. Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, originally composed and recited in Sanskrit, that every living being is connected to the whole. Every living being is connected to the whole. But due to conditioned life, we are all struggling in conditioned life. We are all struggling very hard. Anyone struggling very hard out there? Or anybody struggling not very hard? I don't know anybody who's not struggling with something. Somebody asked me the question, I'm going through various circumstances in my personal life. And she asked, do you think everybody goes through something like this? And I said, I do. I think our circumstances are all very different. But the experience of being misunderstood, the experience of feeling insecure or feeling behind in life, the experience of questioning my self-worth, the experience of frustration, of being tired. I think all of those things, no matter how wealthy or no matter how great or not great your economic situation is, no matter how beautiful or broken your relationship status is, no matter your family dynamics, my experience is that everybody has these experiences in life to some degree at various times in our life. I think because it's just the climate. It's just the climate of the material world. It's like I live in New York, and spring is just around the corner. It's not yet. I'm still looking at the forecast, and I'm like, okay, let me look and see where it's finally, like a week from now, it's going to be 60 degrees, which for us in New York, that's warm. And it's not here yet, but it's coming. It's very, very, very soon. And but the weather is cold. And so it's like asking the question, do you think everybody gets cold when they go outside? It doesn't matter how rich or poor you are. It doesn't matter your waist size. It doesn't matter your relationship status. It doesn't matter how successful you are in your career or how unemployed you are or how many marriages you've been through or are not had. When you step outside, it gets cold, and you're cold, and you need to bundle up. No matter what your situation is, no matter your nationality, your race, your weight, your hair color, your hair length, no matter who you are, when you step outside, it's cold because that's just the climate. And so when we're in the material world, we're disconnected. We're like leaves that have fallen off of the tree. And therefore, we are naturally feeling the sense of disconnection. We're like a fish out of water. And so we are stuck inside a material body and having a material mind. And it's an uncomfortable situation. Sometimes it was described by Srila Prabhupada, a translator and commentator on many vast Vedic literatures. He would say it's an awkward situation. I was reading that earlier this week. It's an awkward situation. And so when Krishna says here in the Bhagavad Gita, 9th chapter, no, what is this? Yeah, no, 15th chapter. I wasn't planning to read this verse. It just kind of came up when I was thinking about the idea of all of us being a connected spiritual family. And this verse came to my mind, Mavayavangso Jiva Loke, that we're all connected parts of a greater whole. But because we're in this conditioned life, because we are embodied in this material world, we're struggling really hard with the six senses, which include the mind. Krishna says earlier in the Gita that the mind can be the greatest friend or the worst enemy. and it plays tricks on us, and it creates stories. Our minds are story making machines. Do your own little personal social experiment and just start to observe the stories of your mind. And when you're running into some scenario and you've come to some conclusion about who somebody is and why they're doing something and why something's happening to you and what something means about yourself as a result of it happening, just ask yourself this question: what is the story that my mind is telling me right now? Because that's not necessarily the reality. That is my mind telling me a story, just like somebody else might tell you a story about what they think is happening and why. My mind is not necessarily a truth teller. It's like you turn on the news, right? You got to watch it with a grain of salt. Everyone's got the news channel that they listen to and don't listen. Everyone's like, I never trust CNN. I don't trust anything I hear on Fox News. You know, I only listen to Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's the gospel. Joe Rogan's the devil. I don't listen to Joe Rogan. I listen to blah, 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 whatever. We have our news sources, right? The mind is just another news source giving us a story. And we have to know when and how to turn the channel and be able to recognize this is just a news story. My mind is crafting a story, and I don't have to believe it. I do not have to believe it. Doesn't mean that I have to become enemies with my mind and shut it out. Krishna actually encourages just the opposite. He encourages become friends with your mind. Just make sure that you're in the driver's seat. Don't let it control you. Observe it, notice it, and you start to put yourself in the driver's seat by not letting it get too out of control. You know, it's like sometimes you have sometimes you have, it's like children and discipline. If it's gone on too long, like a lack of discipline, it's hard to kind of like correct it later. Or even as adults, when we go too undisciplined for too long, it almost becomes really difficult to set something back on track because we've just become so used to running amok. And so the mind is something we have to learn how to train and how to sharpen and how to bring under our own control rather than letting it control us. And so Krishna says, mana shastashtindriyani, the mana, the six senses, including the mind. So the living entities in this is the Bhagavad Gita 15th chapter, verse 7, for those of you who are verse nerds like me. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. So you are part of a global spiritual family. Why? Because you're like the spokes on a wheel. The wheel has a hub, and that hub connects every spoke on that wheel. The spokes themselves aren't all one and just merge into each other like one big spoke. They're individual spokes with space and distance in between them that's healthy, but they all serve a purpose and they are connected to that whole. That source is what connects all of us. So you're part of a spiritual family, in case you forgot. But due to conditioned life, due to being in this material world, we're struggling really hard with the six senses, which include the mind. And that's why we're here. We're here. This is your daily spiritual check-in, just to remember who we are and your situation in life. And sometimes if things seem to be falling apart around you, if life feels like you're an ant trying to swim through a puddle of molasses and everything is just hard, it's not necessarily because you're doing everything wrong. It's just the nature of the world and life, because you are not meant to be swimming in this river. We're not. We're not meant to necessarily be swimming in this this river of material life. We are meant for a different ocean. I was reading this. I teach some online classes, and I was quoting this verse. Let me look up this. It's not a verse, it's a quote from C.S. Lewis. Yeah, this beautiful quote that he shares. I love C.S. Lewis. He says, if we find ourselves with the desire that nothing in this world can satisfy. The most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. I'm going to read that again. If we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. And so rather than feeling like I'm doing life wrong, realize that maybe this isn't the end life that we're all meant to lead, that there is another eternal destination, which we are all destined for, a destination that we are all destined for. So I'm going to go ahead and I wasn't planning to get into this verse. I'm just rolling with it. If you're new to the show, you know that we just roll with things. Oops. Has my video been off this whole time? Did I accidentally click off my video? Anyways, I'm back. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening to podcasts, that's okay. We do this live, so there are no edits. We're rolling with it. Okay, back on track. There's a commentary to this verse. I'll read some of it and see where we go. In this verse, the verse that I read about the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. Commentary. In this verse, the identity of the living being is clearly given. So we discussed that at length just now. The idea that we are eternal spirit souls, Sat Chit Ananda. We're not Kapha Pitta Vata. We're not Scorpio, Aquarius, moon, rising sign. We're not manifesting generators, reflectors, EMFTs, whatever our personality types are. Those are who we are conditionally in this life. That's like that. Those are like the specs on our car, right? I got a Ford F-150 with automatic super drive and a diesel engine with custom seats and a seat warmer and a multi-track CD player, although no one listens to CDs anymore. That's who I am. Like, no, those are the specs on your car. Those are the specs on your car. They're real and they're important, and we all need cars and we get around, unless you're in New York City, which most of us don't have cars. But so it's important to know that and how to get around and how to move around. But that's not you. That's not the deep, real you. In this verse, the identity, the actual identity, the you, the real ego, not the false ego. Ego just means identity. The real you. We have a real ego. We have a false ego and we have a real ego, the real me. The living entity, continuing on, is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme eternally. So the specs on my car, that's just temporary. Even if I love my car, even if it's so custom made and it's so comfortable and it moves in and out of traffic and it's easy to park and I love the color and it purrs like a kitten and I just love it so much, it's not going to last forever. Even it's got great gas mileage, built for tough, it's not going to last. What are you going to get? 200,000, 300,000, 350,000 miles on it? Maybe. It's not going to make it. At some point, you got to trade it in. But that's not who we are eternally. We are someone else eternally. So comment here. The living entity is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme eternally. It is not that they assume individuality in this conditioned life and in the liberated state becomes one with the Supreme. No, we are always individual. So that's this word. Srila Prabhupada's making the point here. Eternal fragmental parts, meaning that Sanatana, this word is used. Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, meaning that we are eternally individual souls. We maintain individuality eternally because love is the highest reality. And so even in our liberated state, it's not that we merge into transcendence, but that we engage in loving relationship with that transcendence, which means there's always, I quote this, what I heard as a French proverb, but I actually stole it from the side box of a Celestial Seasonings tea box, that in love, there's always the one who kisses and the one who offers the cheek, meaning it takes two to exchange love. And that, in many ways, is bhakti in a nutshell. And there's the individual soul and the supreme soul and exchanging love. Prabhupada goes on. It is clearly said, Sanatan, according to the Vedic version, the Supreme manifests and expands in innumerable expansions, of which the primary expansions are called Vishnu Tattva, and the secondary expansions are called the living entities. So we are expansions of that Supreme person. In other words, the Vishnu Tattva is the personal expansion, this technical word, Vishnu Tattva, which literally means God truth. And the living entities are the separated expansion. So we are this idea of part and parcel. We're one with and eternally different from the Supreme. We're one because we're made of the same energy. We have the same source, but we're different in that we have our own individual nature. Okay. I think that's what I'm going to read for there. It's a long purport. Oh, this is a good part. This is later on down in the paragraph. I'll read the last paragraph of this commentary. The words my vangsa, fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme. So this was the beginning. Mamai vangsang jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. Again, Bhagavad Gita, 15th chapter, verse 7. Srila Prabhupada says is also very significant. The fragmental portion of the Supreme. This is really, really beautiful. Lean in here. If you're taking notes, if you're dozing off, if you need a little bit of hope in your life, turn up the volume, turn back in, put down the dishes, and just like listen in for just a quick second. The fragmental portion of the Supreme is not like some material broken part. You are not a broken part of God. You are not damaged goods. You are not like a crumpled piece of paper that we're trying to iron back out. The fragmental portion of the Supreme is not like some material broken part. He goes on. We have already understood in the second chapter that the spirit cannot be cut into pieces. Second chapter of Bhagavad Gita is this very extensive treatise of the soul. It talks about the immutable nature, the eternal nature, the undying nature, the immortal nature of the soul. So Prabhupada's referencing that there. This fragment is not materially conceived. It is not like matter, which can be cut into pieces and joined to get together again. So Krishna also mentions earlier in the beginning, it does not come into being and what's the verse? Let's find that verse. Second chapter, does not come into being. Gita, Veda base. I love being able to search for stuff. Bhagavad Gita, second chapter, verse 20. For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. It does not come into being. It has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. The soul is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. It is not slain when the body is slain. Let's read that again. Dial it back. For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. Doesn't expire after 350,000 miles. Doesn't need a new transmission. There's neither birth nor death at any time. It has not come into being, which means there wasn't a time when it didn't exist and all of a sudden, boop, it existed. It's always been there. It has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. There's not going to be any more souls created because they are eternal. No beginning, no end. The soul is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. It's not slain when the body is slain. So Srila Prabhupada is referring back to that section of Bhagavad Gita where we're talking about the soul. It's like, let's just remember. And that's why that's Krishna's first instruction in the Gita, is to remember that you're a spirit soul. Because take everything I say moving forward, keep that in context. And can we keep that in context in our life? Can we keep that in context in our life, just to pause before I get triggered, before I launch into an argument, before I feel like I got to defend myself and put someone else down and explode in a rage? Those things happen. I get it. I got my anger issues I'm working through. But can I learn to catch myself more quickly and just sink into a little bit of a deeper wisdom that, you know what? Let me just pause and put this into the context of the eternality of the soul and let that guide me. So this fragment is not materially conceived, Srila Prabhupada writes. It is not like matter, which can be cut into pieces and joined together again. That conception is not applicable here because the Sanskrit word sanatana, eternal, is used. The fragmental portion is eternal. You're eternal. We're eternal. And we're all connected to that divine source. It is also stated in the beginning of the second chapter that in each and every individual body, the fragmental portion of the Supreme is present. That fragmental portion, when liberated from the bodily entanglement, revives its original spiritual body in the spiritual sky and a spiritual planet, and enjoys association with that Supreme Person. I'm going to read that again because that is so gosh dang beautiful. The fragmental portion, meaning you and me, that individual part of God, when we're entangled and we're struggling with the six senses, including the mind, we're struggling in the climate like an ant swimming through molasses. When liberated from the bodily entanglement, when we free ourselves from this entanglement, when I emerged like the lotus flower out of the mud of the circumstances of my material existence, it revives its original spiritual body. Not just like a new spiritual body, like, ooh, this house looks nice. No, the original spiritual body. You have an original form. You have an original identity. You have an original spiritual nature that has not been erased, has not been deleted, has not been warped and dented and maimed and crippled. It's just been covered over. It's just been covered over. And we're just trying to wipe away the dust. So it revives its original spiritual body in the spiritual sky, in a spiritual planet, and enjoys association with that Supreme Being. It is, however, understood here, I'm reading now, that the living entity, being the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme, is qualitatively one with that Supreme, just as the parts and parcels of gold are also gold. So this idea of like if a flake of gold chips off the original stone, it's still gold qualitatively, but not quantitatively the same. So we are little drops. We are sparks of the greater fire. And we have a beautiful relationship with that Supreme. And that Supreme is calling us back. That's why I think Krishna plays the flute, because he's calling us back with this sweet song. Okay, enough rambling for me today. Kimberly's not here. She's normally our Rapadapacharya who gives us some takeaways that we pull away with. So she's not here this week. She's not going to be here next week. So I'm relying on you, our live studio audience. If you want to share any takeaways, you can feel free to write them in the chat and I will read them out. Today's Friday, so we got no episodes this weekend. Before we get to that, join us next week. If you didn't tune in yesterday, the last episode before this one was the first one we had after we took a several week break of Spirit Matters. You may have noticed that we had some important announcements that we made in terms of some shifts in how we're running our podcasts. And so please go back and listen to that episode to catch our updates, because it's just me moving forward. Chitta Gopi and Kishore have decided to take a break, step away, and just shift their focus and energy to a couple other things that they've got going on in life. So they won't be joining us on the podcast anymore. And I will be hosting various guests from our local and extended community. And next week, I've got my very, very good and dear friend, Rukmini Podar, who won't join us on Monday, but she'll join us Tuesday through Friday of the week. So I'll be here on Monday running solo. So you just got me if you want that. If that's not good enough for you, just tune out and join us on Tuesday. But please tune in next week and go back and listen to yesterday's episode, because we want you to take the journey with us. Stephanie Heinhold from Utah said, "Thank you for that analogy. It gives me a better idea of what it means to work with this temporary vehicle and try to remember that I'm the eternal driver. You are." Dana K from Florida says, "Change the channel. The mind is a bad storyteller." It is, but it could become a helpful storyteller if we learn how to work with it. But yes, there's a lot of bad stories that my mind. I once heard somebody said that, like, hanging out in the mind is like taking a long walk in a bad neighborhood. The mind is not necessarily a place you want to be. Richard from Virginia said, "Who's driving?" Great question. Internal family systems, not necessarily discussed in the Bhagavad Gita, but if you're looking for healing, I recommend looking into internal family systems, the inner dialogue of all the different parts of ourselves. And who's really running the show? Stephanie Heinhold again says, "Pause and remember our eternal connections." That's a beautiful, profound one. Pause and remember our eternal connections. Leslie says, "We were meant for another world." Thank you, C.S. Lewis. Very, 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 very true. Richard says, "We are spokes on the wheel." Just reading them off. Leslie says, "The car isn't going to last forever." It is not. But there is, as we learned, we have an original blueprint. There is an original us that we can discover. And Dana Yu says, I don't know if that's Dana K. There's a Dana Yu now. We have a Dana K and a Dana Yu on our show. Welcome, Dana Yu. In this world, but not of this world. Beautiful, beautiful takeaway. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for listening, for tuning in. Please, if you haven't already, and even if you have, just double check to make sure you did. Write us a review wherever you're listening to podcasts. I don't know if Spotify has reviews, but you can rate us on Spotify, 5-star. And even if you don't listen on Spotify, go listen to us a 5-star on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Even if you don't listen to Apple Podcasts, go find an Apple Podcast app, search Spirit Matters, leave us a 5-star rating, and write a review. It helps us a lot. As soon as you do that, it increases our exposure. We can increase our spiritual family, and more people can come and join the show. We love you all so, so, so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being you. Have a wonderful and fantastic weekend, and come join us again next week. We're taking 2 days off. We'll see you on Monday, everybody. Bye-bye.